So my research is about exploring student approaches to learning through sequence analysis of reading logs. As I mentioned, we conducted this research in Kyoto University. So here you can see my co-authors, list of my co-authors. Okay, so this is the summary of our research. In Kyoto University, we developed this system book roll, which I will talk more about it later. But this is a kind of eBook reader. So we are collecting data related to students' reading processes. And we are trying to understand how students are reading, so by analyzing this log data. So in this research, we also have a group of students, and we have a book roll system to collect data. And after that, we analyze this data to find some groups of students. And we also use this student approaches to learning theory to design this research, also to explain the results. So today I will talk about 4 main things. One of it is the student approaches to learning theory and research design, data collection tools, and data analysis part, and finally the results and conclusions. So actually this student approaches to learning theory is one of the oldest learning theories, and one of the earliest attempts researchers try to understand how students are approaching the reading task. So for this they conduct one experiment and they gave students a reading task, and after that they also collect data by using the quizzes and the questionnaire to understand their level of understanding or level of processing. So at the end of the experiment, they found that students are approaching to the reading task by using 2 different ways. And one of them is surface and one of them is deep. And here you can see the character size of these approaches. Surface students who are using the surface approach, they are generally they lack of purpose. They are just trying to memorize the words, or they fear of failure. But on the other hand, deep learners, they are seeking of meaning. They try to relate the ideas with their previous knowledge. So they try to use evidence or something like this. Later studies also confirmed these findings, and they also found that there is another approach, so which they call is achieving or strategic by different researchers. And the character size of this group is maybe one of the biggest difference is they have time management, so they are more strategic. They try to get the highest scores, but with the minimum effort. So that's why they try to manage their time to achieve this goal. So this the surface deep learning also related to learning outcomes. That's why we are interested in this kind of research. So based on the previous research, not all of them, but most of them found that the surface learning related to low scores. On the other hand, deep learning is related to high scores. So why detecting students' approaches to learning from log record is important? So because it is, as I mentioned before, it is related to learning outcomes. So the other thing is it is a dynamic feature. So it can be changed like time to time or task to task or from one course to another course. So that's why you cannot measure this by using the questionnaire. So there are also other problems with the self-report questionnaire, as we all know, but because of this dynamic structure, we cannot use them all the time. So it's not convenient to measure it. So that's why if we can measure this from the logs or other by using other types of data, it can be good. So these are the research questions. Is it possible to identify surface, deep, and strategic learners from the reading logs? What is the relationship between study approaches and learning outcomes? And what are the characteristic association rules between surface, deep, strategic learners, reading behaviors, and their academic performance? So here I will briefly talk about data collection, preprocessing, and data analysis part. So this is the framework that we use to collect data. I think the first presenter also mentioned about this. So we use book roll system to collect reading logs, but this system is connected to the learning analytics framework, as you can see here. So students log into the book roll through the Moodle by using this API protocol, and all the logs from the reading system, book roll system, are collected into the learning record store as an XAPI statement. We also have dashboard to show some graphs or interventions to the students. So this book roll system is part of this learning analytics framework. Okay, this is a reader that I mentioned. So here it's kind of web-based tool. So students don't need to install anything. They just need to log in this through their Moodle system. And after that, a teacher can upload PDF files to this system, and students can read it. While they are reading, they also have a chance to add notes, or they can highlight some part of the text. So they have search option, they can add bookmark, or they can just read the content. So this is the system. And on the right side, you can see the sample reading logs from a reading session. So for example, students here open the book and then click the next button, then jump button, and maybe add memo here, and after that again next, then previous button. And then it's like sequential data with the timestamp. So we are, our database are logging these actions. And in this study, we analyzed that sequential data. So data collection, we conducted this experiment with a group of students from Taiwan. So there were 89 students who are registered to freshman English course. And we collected data for 2 weeks. We gave them one reading task, and the book roll also has some predefined quizzes inside, so students can answer them, and we use them to measure their level of comprehension. And at the end of the data collection period, we got this 25,000 rows of logs. And on the right side, you can see the number of logs in each type of events, like how many times they open the book, how many times they click the next button, previous button, etc., etc. And here you can see the some screenshots from the reading material. So here I put these 3 different modes. For example, they can just read the content, as I mentioned before, or they have a chance to add some notes or highlight some part of the content while they are reading by using these annotation tools. And they also have a chance to answer these questions embedded inside the learning material. So this is the learning material we used, and also how we collect this data. And there were 25 pages in that content, and also 11 questions. So feature extraction is one of the important part of this research, I think. So we extracted 3 different types of features. One is timing, one is another one is timeout and marker. So timing means total time spent on the content during the class, because this one was a 2-week experiment, and sometimes they use it inside the class, but the other times they use the book roll or this eBook system outside, out of the class. So that's why we separate these logs as time in and time out. And we also measure how many markers they put while they are reading the content. So here I will try to explain our data preprocessing methods in more detail. So we process the data at the page level. For example, here you can see that this student 1, the second one should be student 2, sorry. And here the page of the contents. I will just try to open an annotation tool if we have. Sorry about that, because I need to show. Okay, maybe you can see it now, I'm not sure. So this is student 1, and this is the page 1, and this is the amount of time this student spends during the class, because this is time in. So we calculated this for each page of the content, and also for all the students. And we also extend this to timeout and marker. So after that, we categorize this data into 2 levels, like low and high activity. And also, if there is no activity, we label it as a no activity. So for example, if it is a 0, we call it as a no activity. So which means that the student doesn't have any activity on that page. So after this conversation, so we got this sequence data like this. For example, for the student 1, it can be something like high, low, no activity, and something like this. So we extracted all this kind of sequences for all students. So after that, we use sequence clustering to group students based on this reading logs. And also we use association rule mining analysis to extract some rules to implement our system. So for the okay, so now I would like to talk about the results. For clustering, we decided the number of clusters by using this student approaches to learning theory. So based on this theory, we try to group students into 3 clusters. And we also validate this. Sorry. Okay. So we also validate this by using this cluster dendrogram, because we don't know if there are really 3 clusters in that data or not. And this dendrogram also shows us, okay, we can group this data into 3 clusters. After that, here we visualize this data from this cluster. So here we got these 3 clusters, and in each cluster you can see students in there, and also you can see you can see their level of their activities from the colors here. So okay, from here we can say that cluster 1, these students are mostly inactive during the class, also during out of the class, and in terms of marker count. And other cluster 2, these students, they are active during the class. They are also active in terms of marker counts, but out of the class, they don't have much activity. But on the other hand, the third cluster, these students are mostly active in the class, out of the class, or in terms of marker count. And we can also see that which page of the content these students are mostly active. For example, for the first cluster, these students, they are active maybe beginning of the content, at the beginning of the content, but not at the end of the content. Maybe this one can be one of the characteristics of this cluster. So we also compare these clusters in terms of total number of times. So based on the graph here, we can say that we can compare these clusters based on their reading time inside the class, out of the class, and marker count, and quiz scores as well. So, okay, from here we can say that the cluster one, they have a minimum activity during the class. On the other hand, these two clusters, they have similar amount of activity. But in terms of timeout, out of class activity, so these two clusters, they don't have much activity out of the class. But the cluster 3, they also have activity here. And marker counts also similar. And quiz scores. So we can say that the students in the cluster 1, they got the lowest quiz scores. On the other hand, the students in cluster 3, they got the highest quiz scores. But the students in cluster 2, they got both low scores and high scores. So yeah, it is like something in between. So we also extracted some rules for each cluster, because as I mentioned before, we would like to implement the obtained results into our system. So for this one, we need some concrete rules or models. So that's why we used association rule mining, and we extracted rules for each cluster. We also named these clusters like surface, strategic, and deep approach. But of course, we don't have any validation for this. It is just our initial hypothesis. But yeah, I will talk about it later as well. Okay, so here you can see that characteristic rules for each cluster. For example, for the first cluster, so here on the left side, you can see the item frequency, which means what kind of, which events or which items are frequent in this group, like quiz law, time and law, and then and low scores as well. And after we extracted this rule, so you can see these patterns. For example, rule 1 says that if timeout, if students no activity during out of the class, this student will get the low quiz score, which it has a high support here. So which means that 76% of the students in that cluster has a similar pattern. And also confidence value here also very high, which means that if students has no activity out of the class, getting the low score, the probability is for that is 94% to get the low score. So we extracted this kind of rules for each cluster. I think I don't have much time, that's why I will skip this part for now. But if you have questions, of course, we can talk about it later. So we extracted these rules for each clusters. And this is, as I mentioned before, this is for system implementation to make some maybe automatic intervention or something like this. So as a conclusion, we can say that, okay, we found these 3 groups, but more evidence required to link these groups with the student approaches to learning theory, because we didn't use anything else to confirm if these clusters are connected to this surface, deep, or strategic approaches. But the truth is we found these 3 groups, and this their quiz scores also different from each other, and their reading patterns also different. So we found these structures inside the data. So these results can be used for monitoring students' reading process, of course, and you can use these association rules to plan some intervention, especially for the at-risk students. And you can use them for identifying problems with the content design based on their maybe marker counts or the time they spent on that page. Or you can use these clusters to organize some group works. And yeah, you can use for prediction as well. And the last one can be important. It can be also used to redesigning the learning materials, because even surface learners, they have some activity at the beginning of the content. So maybe we can put some important information at the earlier pages, so something like this. Now, of course, this is just a short paper, so more detailed research is required to make some stronger claim about this. So there is limitations of our research. This is the last thing I would like to talk about. So of course, external validation is required, but I'm not sure if we can use the questionnaire for this, because there are also problems with the questionnaires. Maybe cognitive science can help us to understand this students' behaviors by using sensors, something like eye tracker or EEG. And of course, we need to rerun the similar experiment with the different tasks, different students, and different courses. Okay, so thank you for your attention.